Welcome to this third episode of BeyondBIM. Today's discussion focuses on the Internet of Things dimension and specifically its implication on the AECO community. Digitization, which is achieved through advanced computerization, has engendered the fourth industrial revolution. This is most frequently discussed, often synonymously with the Internet of Things. And it is also a topic of great importance, specifically with the abundance of servitization of the AECO industries. And so, in today's episode, I will be interviewing an industry expert to balance out the expertise that we have been given in the past from academics. Today's interviewee is Damon Abruzere, a systems architect at CISCO. He is an experienced security architect and a network engineer with a career that has expanded over many different areas of IT, but primarily with a focus on cybersecurity technology, where he's built the bulk of his expertise from. His work spans from several U.S. government markets, including the Department of Defense, the federal law enforcement, state and local organization, in addition to other commercial entities. His recent work has been focused on providing short and medium and long-term IT architecture strategies, and this has led him to dive deeper into the global IT infrastructures and the Internet of Things. And more recently, he has familiarized himself with the subject matter of architecture specifically, and this he has accumulated through a MSc in architectural studies. And following this, he has now reached a new focus on bridging the gap between architecture and design with cybersecurity and information technology in mind. So, Damon, can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Yeah. So the last 20 plus years, I've been involved in the IT industry ever since I've gotten out of my undergrad program. I've worked everything from state and local government to federal government, military, even some commercial work. So over the years, I've got a bit of a background in a lot of different things, not just security, but also kind of started out doing some networking, just being an engineer, right? Learning the business and helping out customers and being the guy that was on the keyboard for a long period of time. Kind of rolled that into a IT architecture position, like an enterprise architect, for a good while, and did some work with several of the military agencies here in the U.S. Basically was trying to protect their environments and put pieces in place to put them in a better situation. It kind of folded into more of a design job for me for a while. And yeah, so over the years, I've just kind of progressed, right? From the guy on the keyboard. I've run network operations center. I've helped build security operations centers for multiple agencies, and worked with some other intel groups over the years. And so now currently I work for CISCO Systems as a security architect. Again, it's IT architecture, right? Not to get it confused with what we're probably going to get into here shortly. But now I provide services as far as planning their IT infrastructure. They're putting things in place for short, medium, and long-term engagements as far as getting their corporate infrastructure up to speed and to try to get them in a better position to kind of thwart off all the things that are happening now in our cybersecurity world. So that's kind of where we're at right now. That's a bit of the high-level view of what I've done the last 20 plus years.
And how would you describe the Internet of Things and its importance to the AEC community?
That is that's an ongoing great question. First of all, a lot of people still kind of question what IoT means, right? So as far as the AEC community, the construction industry, if you will, or the architecture community, if they really think about it in terms of combining what traditionally was industrial or OT or operational technology, where you think of things that are like physical devices and things and things that were put in place, processes to run industrial machines and internal things within the company to make the factory work, if you will. That's sort of now combined with traditional IT, as everybody thinks of it today, right? IP-based technologies. So almost any company now, the last 15, 20 years, if you don't have an IP network in your company, you're probably missing out, right? So it's kind of the culmination and a combination of both of those, right? So everything's becoming IT based. We're moving more from a proprietary kind of network environment in the traditional sense, and things are sort of getting melded together now, right? So even in the traditional IT sense in the last 10 years, people aren't just looking at what they have in their four walls within their office space. They're now expanding that into a larger set of technologies and systems and processes that are in place in order to maintain that, which includes software and hardware and infrastructure to all support that. So IoT, Internet of Things, as it's always mentioned, is really kind of bringing those two together, and it's going to expand, right? So now we're getting into sensors that are in place for many different things, between temperature sensors, space sensors, to where people are moving, anything that you can think of, light, sound, anything that could be detected by electronic means are now IP based. They're web based. They're cloud based endpoints. They're passive and they're active. They're gathering data, right? So now we're using that data for certain things, and the effect on the industry is going to be pretty big. And as people have seen, and of course, we're kind of at still the beginning of that phase. So it'll be interesting to see where we end up going with it. That data is now being used to drive operational decisions for companies, to drive those OT decisions that were previously done in-house and in those proprietary networks. So it definitely be it'll definitely be interesting to see where it goes, but I think the impact is going to be massive over the next couple of years.
And have you ever come across this in the AEC sector as well?
So in my brief background, so just to kind of the end of my background, right? So as you mentioned, I do have a little bit of experience in the architecture community. So the last couple of years, I decided that I wanted to expand my IT background and do something a little bit different that I wanted to do before. So I went and got my master's in architecture, master's of science. I didn't get my full MArch, but I went through the process of learning to be a designer, to learning to be an architect. And I started getting involved in some of the firms where I live here locally, just to see how they operate, to see how things work. And I've always been interested in it. So it was really eye-opening as I started to see the use of a lot of the new technologies that are out there, right? As we're probably, we're going to discuss BIM. I mean, building information modeling itself, just the whole process and the ecosystem of that has really expanded what their capabilities are going to be. And it's all IT based, right? It's going to impact exactly how they do business moving forward. And specifically, I've seen some companies that are using some of the data that's being used just from drones, right? So now people are using drones to look at spaces, to look at outside, to make sure that they're utilizing the space that they're going to build a building on. They can get more detailed information. They can feed that into their BIM technology, whether that's, Revit or whatever tool it is that they use. And they're able to provide more of an in-depth, view of what they can do with the space, terrain-wise, how they're building it out, how they're excavating it. So that's happening right now, and that's real time. But there's so much potential coming in the future that I think it's going to be, it's really going to take off.
So based on your experience with the IoT domain and cybersecurity, then can you tell us more about the implications?
Absolutely, right? And it's going to be massive, right? And I think people are starting to understand that. Architects are starting to understand that. Construction companies. There's going to be more value. So if we go through kind of a list of things, right? Like I already mentioned, drones are used for mapping areas. They're doing detailed auditing of site builds, et cetera, right? GPS data now can be combined with all of this other information, right? So for building roads or buildings or doing an excavation project or manipulating land, they're able to see, like you mentioned, where the equipment is at during a build. So they're getting real live information that they may have not have otherwise even seen before. So the project managers, if you will, have a better view into what's going on. What's that going to do? It's going to reduce some of the costs potentially. It's going to increase some of the speed at which they're able to perform. And so look at some of the sensor data they're going to get. They can get temperature as they're building a structure. They can see the implications of light coming into the structure as they're building it, right? The movement of people around the space. They can even start to put RFID sensors, right, for workers to figure out where they're going and what they're working on first. Some of this, the impact of that could be a little intrusive, right? But that might be from a personal standpoint. If I'm a worker, right, you may not want someone tracking you, but at the end of the day, right, it comes down to quality of work, the time they're able to do it, and of course the money that they're going to be able to do it with. Now, some of the things that are going to make that impact more impactful, right, are things like 5G coming, right? The cellular technology is improving, Wi-Fi 6. That's going to be a massive increase of bandwidth and availability for these companies, for the architecture community. It's going to have an exponential increase and a direct relationship, if you will, for protecting those systems as well. So the impact there to the architects and the designers and the construction companies is, man, this really isn't something I had to think about before, right? And believe me, I didn't mention before, I'm not really a sky is falling kind of security guy, but I'm a little more pragmatic than that.
So you mentioned doomsday scenarios, but what would that actually mean to the everyday user?
Well, so think about just the pure numbers of devices that are going to be out there, right? No one's really thought, first of all, it's nice to use the innovation. It's nice to use the technology. But now what if someone else gets a hold of that, right? That's what people are talking about now. Like, well, what if they get a hold of that data? Is there something they can do with it? I think a lot of it is still a little bit unknown. You have to kind of put what we refer to in the community as your gray hat on, right? To figure out what those adversaries would potentially use the data for. And again, not to be a doomsday guy, but right, I mean, back in the day, if you think historically, architects and designers in the community and construction companies had rolls and rolls and rolls of paper, right? It was all of their designs. They drew them out on paper, they printed them on paper, and they carried them with them from site to site. Now it's all electronic. And now the information feeding into those is electronic, and it's freely available. I mean, so you have to think about how you're protecting that data that's inputting into those, and also the data itself. So again, I mentioned before, like, companies aren't just in their four walls anymore. Their data could be based in the cloud. What does the cloud mean, right? The old joke is the cloud is just someone else's computer. So it's other companies managing that data for you. It's other companies holding your data for you. How are you working with those cloud-based companies to protect your data? Or the software companies who have what we refer to as software as a service, providing that software for you. And what are the implications there and the protection measures that, wait a minute, I just went from a paper system to now a completely electronic system. And that's a whole new world. And for a lot of people, that may be a pretty wide, river to cross from a learning perspective, right?
Where do you think the responsibility for security lies then? Is it on the technology provider or with the end user?
I believe it's going to be a lot of both, right? So if I compare it to other systems, it's no different than other organizations in other markets, right? So they've had to learn how to adapt to this new IT market, right? So we used to go to work with a briefcase and pad, paper, and pencil. Now it's everybody's, like, my office is my laptop, right? So it's a different mindset. I think it is incumbent, on the companies to educate their end users on what it is they need to do. And we're talking about simple things, doing proper passwording, proper protection measures on your own equipment. Now I'm carrying all this data around on my laptop that's now available on the internet. What if I lose my laptop? What if I lose my USB stick that has all of this data on it, right? So again, very pragmatically, right, thinking about some of the things that most people see in their day-to-day jobs, that now is impacting, I think, the AEC community a little bit later than most, but it's starting to take hold, and I do see some firms that are taking it seriously and putting protection measures in place to be able to do that. And it's a working relationship. between the companies, the end user, the cloud providers, the software companies. I think the world is on its toes now from all the things that have happened the last 10 years. It's really starting to become a real facet of day-to-day business.
Which industry sectors are then best equipped to manage security with the Internet of Things?
Wow, that's a pretty loaded question. I really don't know. I mean, in my experience, I think, cities and states, right? Because they deal with it all the time. They're gathering data from, signal. Everything's IP based now, right? So signal lights on the streets, the sensors that are used for when cars are moving around. There's smart roads now to determine road conditions and things. And so I think they're probably a little further ahead. I think the only ones that are on that level really are the .com industry, if you will, the people who deal with it the most. As far as a market region, right? I really just think it's kind of the state and local government, at least here in the U.S. I imagine it's probably the same across the world.
Okay.
Of those people who may have the most experience with it.
And for our final question, in your transition into the architectural domain, what surprised you the most in your most recent experience within the architectural studies, coming from an IT background?
Well, for me personally, I went from 20 years of being an engineer to moving to kind of a mindset of an architect, right? That was a personal transition for me to really understand, going from ones and zeros to mathematics to, problem solving at a real discretionary, view to more of a artistic view of how space is created. To really understand why some of the buildings are constructed the way they are, why they're designed the way they are. It was really eye-opening. I walk around now and I'm starting to look at different buildings and different constructions, and I can appreciate a little more kind of where they came from. Back years ago, I would have thought, well, maybe they just put a few, potato chips on the ground and just use that as their as their model to design, right? Or some blocks on top of each other. But now I think I really understand a little bit more of the mindset of creating space and how people use the space. And that was probably the most eye-opening for me personally.
Once again, thank you for listening to BeyondBIM podcast. If you want to stay up to date with the latest episodes, you can visit our website or subscribe to Coin PM, available on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcast.